The spotlight hit my face like a slap, and I stood frozen on the stage, watching my cousin Sophia stride past me with that familiar smirk. She'd done it again, stolen my role, my dreams, everything I'd worked for. The director's words still echoed in my ears. "I'm sorry, but we've decided to give the lead to Sophia. You'll be her understudy." I felt the familiar burn of poison in my veins, the metallic taste flooding my mouth. My vision blurred as I collapsed to my knees, hearing Sophia's mock concern. "Oh my God, is she having another one of her episodes? Someone call an ambulance." The last thing I saw before darkness claimed me was her triumphant smile as she consoled my parents, who rushed to the stage looking more embarrassed than worried. But this time I knew exactly what would happen next. Because I'd lived through this before, literally died from it. The poison Sophia had been slipping into my water bottles for months, making me appear unstable and unreliable, had finally killed me in my previous life. I died at 23, alone in a hospital bed, while she gave her acceptance speech for the Tony Award she'd won, performing the role she'd stolen from me. The role in Midnight's Garden, the play that had launched her career and buried mine. Except this time, things would be different. Because when I'd opened my eyes 3 months ago, I wasn't in a hospital or the afterlife. I was back in my childhood bedroom, 18 years old again, staring at the calendar showing 5 years before my death. 5 years to change everything. And the first major crossroads was approaching fast, the audition for The Swan's Last Song, the play that would either make or break a career. In my previous life, I'd won the lead role fair and square, only to have Sophia orchestrate my downfall on opening night. She'd doubled my dose of her special poison, causing me to collapse on stage in front of critics, investors, and talent scouts. The production had been a massive success, but not for me. Sophia had stepped in as my understudy and delivered a performance that launched her into stardom. The thing is, I remembered something else from that life, something Sophia never knew I'd overheard while semi-conscious in the hospital. The Swan's Last Song wasn't the only major production that year. There was another play, Crimson Butterflies, that was supposed to be the year's biggest hit. All the industry insiders had been buzzing about it, but it had been a spectacular failure. The script was pretentious, the direction was abysmal, and the lead actress, whoever she was, had her career destroyed overnight. In my previous life, Sophia had manipulated her way into The Swan's Last Song and avoided that disaster entirely. But what if, this time, I could guide her toward Crimson Butterflies instead? "Are you all right?" The stage manager's voice brought me back to the present. I was still on my knees on the stage, but this was just a rehearsal for our college production. A minor play that didn't matter in the grand scheme of things. "I'm fine," I said, standing up slowly, making sure to appear slightly shaky. "Just dizzy. Maybe I should sit this one out." "Sophia can take over for today," the director said, exactly as I knew he would. My cousin practically glowed with false sympathy as she helped me to a chair. "You really should take better care of yourself," she whispered, her hand on my shoulder feeling like a spider. "I worry about you, cousin." I wanted to laugh. Worry. She'd been planning my destruction since we were children. It started when we were 7, and I'd won the lead in our elementary school play. She'd accidentally spilled paint all over my costume an hour before the show. When we were 12, she'd deleted my audition video for the state youth theater program from my computer and submitted her own under my name, then acted shocked when they called asking why I'd sent the wrong file. At 15, she'd spread rumors that I was bulimic, making directors question my stability and health. At 17, she'd seduced my boyfriend and made sure I walked in on them the night before my Juilliard audition, leaving me too devastated to perform well. But the poisoning had been her masterpiece. Small doses of thallium in my drinks, not enough to kill quickly, just enough to cause tremors, confusion, and weakness. Symptoms that looked like anxiety, eating disorders, or mental illness. She'd been my roommate, my supportive cousin, who helped me through my struggles, all while slowly murdering me. Our family dynamic had always been poisoned from the root. My father, Marcus Chen, was the successful one, a renowned Broadway producer who'd married my mother, Eleanor, a talented actress in her own right. Sophia's father, my Uncle James, had always lived in Marcus's shadow, working as a middling talent agent who could never quite break into the big leagues. The resentment had festered for decades, and it had pooled into Sophia like toxic waste into a reservoir. My parents, for all their success, were blind to their niece's nature. They saw her as the struggling cousin who needed support, not the viper she truly was. When Sophia's parents divorced, a messy affair that left James nearly bankrupt, my parents had taken her in, given her a room in our penthouse, and paid for her theater education. They'd praised me for being generous when I shared my opportunities with her, never realizing she was taking them by force. "Your father called," my mother had said just last week, barely looking up from her script. "He's gotten you both auditions for several productions next month. Try not to embarrass us this time." This time, as if my previous failures were my fault, as if I hadn't been systematically sabotaged at every turn. The casual cruelty of their dismissal hurt worse than Sophia's deliberate malice. At least she saw me as a threat worth destroying. To my parents, I was just a disappointment, a weak daughter who couldn't live up to the family legacy. But that was the past, or rather, the future that wouldn't happen again. I had knowledge now that changed everything. I knew which productions would succeed and which would fail. I knew which directors were secretly predators and which were genuine mentors. I knew that in 6 months, Andrew Fitzgerald, the legendary playwright, would discover he had terminal cancer and would want to produce one last play, a play he'd choose his lead actress for personally, based on a private audition that Sophia had somehow secured in my previous life through connections I'd never understood. I understood them now, though. She'd been sleeping with Michael Brennan, Fitzgerald's assistant, feeding him information about me that made him think I was unsuitable for the role. This time, I'd make sure that affair never happened, or better yet, that it backfired spectacularly. "I should head home," I said, standing carefully. "I don't want to hold everyone back." "Oh, don't be silly," Sophia said, her concern thick as syrup. "We're family. I'll take notes for you. Make sure you don't miss anything important." The director nodded approvingly. "That's very kind of you, Sophia. Families should support each other." I bit my tongue to keep from screaming the truth. Family? She'd killed me. She'd stolen my life, my career, my future. But I smiled weakly and gathered my things, knowing that every moment of perceived weakness now was an investment in my eventual triumph. The next 3 weeks were crucial. The auditions my father had arranged were coming up, and I knew exactly which ones mattered. The Swan's last song would be there, of course, but so would Crimson Butterflies. In my previous life, I'd never even considered auditioning for it. The marketing had made it seem too avant-garde, too risky for someone trying to establish themselves. But Sophia, with her ego and ambition, wouldn't be able to resist if she thought it was the better opportunity. I spent the next days carefully planting seeds. I left my laptop open to an article about Crimson Butterflies, with highlighted sections about the revolutionary script and career-defining role. I had fake conversations on the phone within Sophia's earshot, pretending to talk to friends about how industry insiders were saying it would be the production of the decade. I even created a fake social media account for a supposed Broadway insider who posted about how CB is the one to watch. Trust me, this will launch someone into the stratosphere. Sophia took the bait exactly as I knew she would. I caught her researching the production late at night, reading every article, watching every interview with the director. She started practicing monologues that would suit that style of theater, overly dramatic, pretentious pieces that she thought showed her range. Meanwhile, I practiced in secret for The Swan's last song. But I was careful to seem like I was struggling, missing notes in rehearsals she attended, fumbling lines when she was watching. I let her see me cry in the bathroom after a particularly bad practice session, knowing she'd comfort me while internally celebrating. "You know," she said one evening as we sat in our shared living room, "maybe you should consider something less challenging for the auditions. Not everyone is meant for lead roles, and there's no shame in that." I looked up at her with carefully crafted vulnerability. "You really think so? But Dad expects—" "Uncle Marcus expects too much sometimes," she said, sitting beside me and taking my hand. The same hand that had poisoned me. "Look, I heard that The Swan's last song is actually not getting as much buzz as people think. The smart money is on Crimson Butterflies. Maybe you should audition for a supporting role there instead. I could put in a good word with the casting director. I heard Michael Brennan knows him. There it was. She was already working on Michael, already setting up her pieces on the board. I let my eyes widen with hope. You'd do that for me. Of course! And you know what? If you want the lead in the Swan's last song, you should go for it. I'll focus on Crimson Butterflies. That way, we're not competing directly. Family shouldn't fight over the same roles, right? I hugged her, feeling her stiffen slightly in surprise. Thank you, Sophia. You're right. I'll audition for Swan's lead and you take Butterflies. May the best cousin win. She smiled, and I could practically see the calculations in her eyes. She thought she was manipulating me into taking the lesser role while she grabbed the prize. If only she knew she was walking into a career-ending catastrophe. The audition day arrived with a crisp New York morning that belied the storm about to unfold. I dressed carefully, not too eager, not too polished. I needed to look like someone trying her best but not quite succeeding. Sophia, on the other hand, looked immaculate in a designer dress I knew she'd bought with money she'd stolen from my wallet over the past month. I'd let her take it, of course. Every dollar she stole was another nail in her coffin. The auditions were held at the Broadhurst Theater, a venue that held particular significance. This was where Sophia had given her Tony-winning performance in my previous life, where my career had died, and where hers had been born from my ashes. But not this time. Nervous? Sophia asked as we sat in the waiting area, surrounded by dozens of other hopefuls. Terrified, I admitted, which was partially true. I was terrified of failing, of somehow messing up this chance to reclaim my life. But I was also exhilarated. You'll do fine, she said, patting my hand condescendingly. And remember, even if you don't get it, there's always next time. There wouldn't have been a next time in my previous life. The poison would have made sure of that. But I just nodded, playing the part of the grateful, naive cousin. My name was called first for The Swan's Last Song. I walked into the audition room where three figures sat behind a table. The director, James Morrison, whom I remembered as tough but fair. The producer, Sarah Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, who had an eye for talent, and the writer, Marcus Webb, who in my previous life had become one of my posthumous champions, saying repeatedly that I would have been perfect for the role if not for my health issues. Whenever you're ready, Morrison said, barely looking up from his notes. I began with the monologue I'd chosen, Helena's speech from A Midsummer Night's Dream. But this wasn't the desperate, yearning Helena that most actresses portrayed. I played her with a quiet strength underneath the pain, a woman who knew her worth even as she loved someone unworthy. It was a subtle choice, but I knew from my previous life that Morrison valued nuance over bombast. I saw him look up, his attention caught. Sarah Chen leaned forward, Marcus Webb set down his pen. When I finished, there was a moment of silence that in my previous life would have terrified me. Now, I knew it for what it was. The pause before everything changed. Can you sing? Webb asked. I nodded and launched into I Dreamed a Dream from Les Miserables, but again, with a different interpretation. Not the broken woman most portrayed, but someone finding strength in acknowledging their pain. My voice soared and broke in all the right places, technique I'd perfected in those final months of my previous life when I'd had nothing to do but lie in bed and practice in my mind. Thank you, Morrison said when I finished, but his tone was different now, interested. We'll be in touch. I left the room, passing Sophia in the hallway. How did it go? She asked, and I let my shoulders slump slightly. I don't know, I think I messed up the monologue. My voice cracked during the song. She squeezed my shoulder and I could feel her satisfaction. I'm sure it wasn't as bad as you think. Now wish me luck for Butterflies. Break a leg, I said, meaning it in ways she couldn't imagine. I waited in the lobby while she auditioned, chatting with other actresses and carefully spreading the rumor I'd prepared. I heard Crimson Butterflies has Anthony Vega attached to direct now. I mentioned casually to a group of gossiping hopefuls. You know, the genius behind last year's off-Broadway sensation? The truth was, Anthony Vega was a hack who'd had one lucky show and was about to prove it with Crimson Butterflies. But his name carried weight right now, and I watched as the gossip spread through the lobby like wildfire. By the time Sophia emerged from her audition, glowing with confidence, Everyone was talking about how Crimson Butterflies was the role to get. How did it go? I asked her. Brilliantly, she said, unable to contain her smugness. The director said I had exactly the quality he was looking for. Sophisticated, he said. Transcendent. Pretentious was more like it, but I smiled and congratulated her. The callbacks came 3 days later. I got one for The Swan's Last Song. Sophia got one for Crimson Butterflies. She also got one for Swan, which she told me about with false reluctance. I don't even know why they called me for Swan, she said. I made it clear Butterflies was my priority. But maybe I should go just for the experience? I knew what she was doing. She wanted to see how I performed, to gauge if I was a threat. In my previous life, this was when she'd increased the poison dosage. You should definitely go, I said enthusiastically. It's good to have options. She studied me suspiciously, but my eager expression must have convinced her I was genuinely too naive to see the threat. The callback day arrived. This time, we were reading scenes with potential scene partners. For Swan, I was paired with David Kim, who I knew from my previous life would become not just my co-star, but one of my few true friends if I got the role. You're really good, he whispered between scenes. Like, really good. Where have you been hiding? Just waiting for the right moment, I said, and meant it more than he could know. When Sophia's turn came to read for Swan, I watched from the wings. She was good, I had to admit that. In my previous life, she'd been brilliant in the role, but she was playing it the way she'd played it then, with a modern edge that she thought was innovative. What she didn't know was that Morrison had specifically told me during our scene work that he wanted a more classical approach this time. Information she would have gotten if she'd been genuinely interested in the role, rather than just keeping tabs on me. After the callbacks, we went home to wait. Sophia was buzzing with excitement about Butterflies, going on and on about the director's vision, the revolutionary staging, the career-making potential of the role. I listened and nodded, occasionally adding supportive comments that fed her confidence. You know, she said that night, pouring us both tea. I didn't drink mine, naturally. I'm really glad we're not competing for the same thing. It feels better this way, doesn't it? More like family. Absolutely, I agreed, watching her sip her own tea. Family should support each other's dreams, not compete. She smiled, and for a moment, I almost saw the cousin she could have been if jealousy and ambition hadn't poisoned her soul. Almost. The calls came the next morning. My phone rang first. Congratulations, Morrison's voice said. We'd like to offer you the role of Isabella in The Swan's Last Song. Rehearsals start Monday. I accepted, my hands shaking with genuine emotion. This was it, the role that should have been mine all along, the beginning of reclaiming my stolen life. Sophia's phone rang minutes later. I watched her face light up as she listened, then saw her nod enthusiastically. When she hung up, she was practically glowing. I got it, she squealed. The lead in Crimson Butterflies. They said I was exactly what they envisioned, that I elevated the material. I hugged her tightly, feeling her heart race against mine. She had no idea she'd just sealed her own fate. We should celebrate, I suggested. Dinner tonight? My treat. She agreed, and we spent the evening at an expensive restaurant, toasting our mutual success. She drank champagne while I stuck to water, claiming I wanted to stay sharp for rehearsals. She laughed at my dedication, calling me adorably earnest. You know, she said, slightly tipsy, I was worried about you for a while. You seemed so fragile. But maybe this will be good for you, having a nice supporting role to build your confidence. Supporting role? I asked innocently. Oh, no. Isabella is the lead in Swan. Her face went still. The lead? But I thought Morrison said what? I kept my voice casual, curious. She recovered quickly. Nothing. I must have misunderstood. That's wonderful. We're both leads. But I saw the calculation in her eyes, the reassessment of threat levels. It didn't matter now, though. The die was cast. Rehearsals began, and I threw myself into Swan with everything I had. I was professional, dedicated, and collaborative. I built relationships with the cast and crew, something I'd been too insecure to do properly in my previous life. David became the friend I'd known he could be, and together we found a chemistry that elevated every scene. Meanwhile, I kept tabs on Sophia's production through the extensive theater grapevine. The reports weren't good. The director was increasingly erratic, making bizarre demands and changing fundamental aspects of the show daily. The script, which had seemed avant-garde on paper, was proving incomprehensible in practice. And Sophia, trying to make sense of the pretentious dialogue and contradictory direction, was struggling. "She's pushing too hard," one mutual acquaintance told me over coffee, "trying to make something out of nothing. The whole cast is—" I expressed appropriate concern and support, even sent Sophia encouraging texts that she responded to with increasing brevity as the weeks went on. 3 weeks before our respective openings, things began to accelerate. Crimson Butterflies had its first preview, and it was a disaster. The audience was confused, some people walked out, and the few early reviews that leaked were brutal. "A pretentious mess," one blogger called it. "The lead actress seems to be performing in a different play entirely, one that makes even less sense than the one on stage." Sophia came home that night looking haggard. "It's just preview jitters," she said, but I could see the panic in her eyes. "The director says we're pushing boundaries, that audiences need time to adjust to brilliance." "I'm sure it'll come together," I said soothingly. "Revolutionary art is always challenging at first." She nodded, clinging to that lifeline, and threw herself even harder into rehearsals. But I knew from my previous life that Butterflies was beyond saving. The script was fundamentally flawed. The director was having what would later be revealed as a psychological breakdown, and no amount of talent could salvage it. Swan, meanwhile, was coming together beautifully. Morrison's direction was clear and inspired. The cast was gelling perfectly, and every preview was better than the last. Word was spreading through the industry that we had something special. "You're different," my father said, attending one of our final rehearsals. "Stronger, more confident. Where has this been hiding?" "Inside a body slowly dying of poison," I thought but didn't say. Instead, I just smiled. "I guess I finally found the right role." He nodded approvingly, and for the first time in either of my lives, I saw genuine pride in his eyes. My mother, sitting beside him, actually put down her phone to watch my final scene. "Well," she said afterward, "perhaps you inherited some talent after all." It was as close to a compliment as I'd ever gotten from her, and despite everything, it still made my chest tight with emotion. 2 nights before opening, disaster struck Crimson Butterflies, but not the kind I'd expected. The director, Anthony Vega, was arrested for embezzling funds from the production. It turned out his previous success had been built on stolen money and ideas, and it was all crashing down. The show would go on, barely, but now it was tainted by scandal as well as artistic failure. Sophia was devastated. "How could I not see it?" she wailed, pacing our living room. "How could I be so stupid?" "You couldn't have known," I consoled her, hiding my satisfaction. "No one could have predicted this, except someone who'd lived through it before." "Maybe I should withdraw," she said desperately. "Say I'm sick, let my understudy—" "You can't do that," I said firmly. "It would destroy your reputation. People would say you abandoned the production when things got tough. You have to see it through." She looked at me with something almost like gratitude. "You're right, I have to be professional. But God, opening night is going to be a bloodbath." Yes, it was. Opening night for Crimson Butterflies came first. I sat in the audience, having told Sophia I wouldn't miss it for the world. The theater was only half full. The scandal and negative buzz had scared away many ticket holders. Critics sat in their usual seats, their faces already set in skeptical expressions. The curtain rose, and it was even worse than I'd remembered from the reviews in my previous life. The play was incoherent, oscillating wildly between pseudo-intellectual rambling and melodramatic excess. But Sophia was magnificent in her failure. She acted her heart out, trying to elevate material that was actively fighting against her. She projected every emotion at maximum intensity, turning what might have been a forgettably bad performance into a memorably awful one. By intermission, people were laughing. Not at the comedy, there wasn't any intentional comedy, but at the sheer pretentiousness of it all. I heard one critic whisper to another, "Is she serious with this performance? It's like watching someone have an artistic seizure." The second act was worse. The director, out on bail and insisting on being present despite his legal troubles, had apparently given last-minute notes that contradicted everything they'd rehearsed. The cast was visibly confused, and Sophia, trying to hold it all together, came across as desperately manic. The final scene, which was supposed to be a profound meditation on the nature of existence, instead played like a parody of every bad student play ever written. When Sophia delivered the last line, "We are all butterflies, crimson with the blood of our own becoming," someone in the audience actually snorted. The curtain call was met with scattered, uncomfortable applause. Sophia's bow was defiant, her chin raised high, but I could see the tears threatening to spill. She knew. She knew it was over before it had begun. The reviews were published online within hours, each one more scathing than the last. The Times called it an embarrassment to the profession. The Post labeled it the worst play of the decade, possibly the century, and Sophia was singled out repeatedly as exemplifying everything wrong with the production: overwrought, painfully pretentious, a masterclass in what not to do on stage. She didn't come home that night, or the next. When she finally reappeared the afternoon of Swan's opening, she looked destroyed. Her eyes were red and swollen, her usually perfect appearance disheveled. "Congratulations on tonight," she said quietly, not meeting my eyes. "I'm sure you'll be wonderful." "Sophia, I'm so sorry about—" "Don't!" She held up a hand. "Just don't. I know everyone's talking about it. I know what they're saying. I've become a joke, a meme. Someone made a compilation video of my worst moments, and it already has 1 million views." She was right. The theater community could be cruel, and her performance in Butterflies had become instant legend for all the wrong reasons. In my previous life, it had been an unknown actress who'd been destroyed by the role. Now it was Sophia, and the fall was so much farther because she'd been so convinced she was ascending. "It's just one show," I said gently. "You can come back from this." She laughed bitterly. "Can I? Michael won't return my calls. Apparently being associated with me is toxic now. The agency dropped me this morning, and Uncle Marcus—" She trailed off. "What about my father? He said I'd embarrassed the family name, that he'd stuck his neck out to get me opportunities and I'd thrown it all away for artistic pretension." She finally looked at me, and for the first time, I saw her without any masks. "Did you know? Did you know it would be this bad?" I met her gaze steadily. "How could I have known? You said yourself it was revolutionary. Sometimes revolution fails." She studied my face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Yeah, sometimes it does. Break a leg tonight, cousin." That night, the Swan's last song opened to a packed house. The energy was electric. Everyone wanted to see if our production could deliver after the disaster of Butterflies. The critics were there in force, many of the same ones who'd eviscerated Sophia's show, and from the moment I stepped on stage, I knew we had them. Every line landed, every song soared, every emotional moment hit with precision. David and I were magnetic together, our chemistry undeniable. The story, a classic tale of love, loss, and redemption, was told with such sincerity and craft that it felt new again. When I delivered Isabella's death scene monologue in the second act, I heard someone in the audience sob. During the curtain call, the standing ovation was immediate and thunderous. I saw my parents in the third row, both on their feet, my mother actually wiping away tears. The reviews were rapturous. "A star is born," the Times declared. "Chen delivers a performance of such depth and nuance that it's hard to believe this is her first major role." The Post called it the must-see production of the season, anchored by a luminous lead performance that announces a major new talent. The contrast with Sophia's reviews couldn't have been starker. We were mentioned together in several pieces: the successful cousin and the failed one, the rise and the fall. It was everything I'd planned, everything I'd orchestrated, but standing in my dressing room after that triumphant opening, I felt oddly empty. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. It was Sophia holding a bouquet of white roses, the same flowers she'd brought to my hospital room in my previous life, the day before I died. "These are for you," she said quietly. "You were magnificent, truly." I took the flowers, their scent triggering sense memories of my deathbed. "Thank you." "I've been thinking," she continued, "about everything, about us, about what I've—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. I know I haven't been the best cousin to you. I've been jealous and competitive and sometimes cruel. It was the closest she'd ever come to an apology in either life. We're family, I said simply. Family is complicated. She nodded, tears starting to fall. I'm leaving. Tonight. I can't stay in New York, not after everything. My aunt in Los Angeles said I could stay with her. Maybe try film or television. Start over where no one knows about butterflies. In my previous life, I would have begged her to stay, would have offered to help, to support her. Even after everything she'd done, I'd always wanted her love, her approval. But that version of me had died, literally. That's probably for the best, I said instead. A fresh start could be good for you. She flinched at my calm response but nodded. Yeah, it could be. I just wanted to say goodbye. And be careful, okay? This world, this business, it eats people alive. Don't let it destroy you like it destroyed me. The irony of her warning from the person who'd literally poisoned me to death was almost too much, but I just smiled. I'll be careful. She left that night, and I never saw her again in person. I heard about her, of course, failed auditions in LA, a brief stint as an acting coach that ended badly, eventually leaving the industry entirely to work in real estate. The last I heard, she was selling condos in Riverside, married to a dentist, living a perfectly ordinary life. The life she'd killed me to avoid. Swan ran for 2 years on Broadway, then toured nationally for another year. I won the Tony for Best Actress, the same award Sophia had won in my previous life. The night of the ceremony, I held the trophy and thought about parallel universes, about the infinite ways a life could unfold. My parents, faced with my success, finally had to acknowledge me as more than a disappointment. My father began including me in production discussions, respecting my opinions. My mother started introducing me as my daughter, the Tony winner, instead of just my daughter. It wasn't the warm, loving relationship I'd always craved, but it was something. Recognition, respect. The things Sophia had killed me for. Andrew Fitzgerald did indeed announce his final production, and this time, when Michael Brennan tried to influence the casting, he was caught in a #Me Too scandal that Sophia wasn't there to be part of. I auditioned for Fitzgerald directly, won the role on my own merit, and his play became another triumph. 5 years later, on the anniversary of my death, I stood on the same stage where I'd once collapsed from poison. I was performing in a revival of Midnight's Garden, the play that had haunted both timelines. The theater was full, critics were calling it the performance of the decade, and I was very much alive. During my bow, I spotted a familiar figure in the back of the orchestra section. Sophia, older now, her face softer with time and defeat. Our eyes met across the crowd, and she raised her hands slightly, not quite a wave, more an acknowledgement. Of what we'd been, what we'd done to each other, what we'd become. I nodded back, then turned to accept the thunderous applause. The lights were blinding, the sound deafening, but I felt perfectly calm. In my previous life, I'd died at 23, poisoned by family, betrayed by blood. In this life, I was 28, successful beyond my wildest dreams and very much alive. The cost had been Sophia's dreams, her career, her entire future in theater. I'd orchestrated her downfall as methodically as she'd orchestrated my death. But unlike her, I hadn't used poison, or lies, or manipulation. I'd simply stepped aside and let her ambition lead her exactly where I knew it would. I'd given her the rope and watched her hang herself with it. Was it justice? Revenge? Or was it simply the universe correcting itself, putting things back the way they should have been? I didn't know. Maybe I'd never know. But as I stood there, alive and triumphant on the stage where I'd once died, I realized it didn't matter. I had won. Not just the roles or the awards or the acclaim. I'd won my life back. Every breath was a victory, every moment on stage a defiance of the fate Sophia had chosen for me. She was alive too, living her small life in California, and perhaps that was the cruelest revenge of all. She had to live with the knowledge of what she'd thrown away, had to see my name in lights, and know that she'd had every opportunity to stand beside me instead of trying to stand on my corpse. The curtain fell, and I walked off stage into my future, a future I'd stolen back from death itself. One calculated decision at a time. In the wings, David was waiting with champagne. My parents were there with actual smiles, and the next script was already waiting in my dressing room. Another role, another chance to live the life that had been taken from me. I thought about the 18-year-old girl who'd woken up 3 months before that first audition, terrified and traumatized, armed with nothing but knowledge of a future that would never come to pass. She'd made hard choices, cruel choices perhaps, but necessary ones. She'd learned that sometimes, to save yourself, you have to let others fall. Sometimes the best revenge isn't doing anything at all. It's simply stepping out of the way and letting people's own nature lead them to their fate. Months turned into years. My career flourished beyond even what I'd achieved in those recovered years. I became not just a Broadway star, but a cultural icon, crossing over into film and television with carefully chosen roles that showcased my range. Every success felt like another nail in the coffin of my previous life, another step away from the girl who'd died alone and forgotten. I bought a penthouse on the Upper West Side, not far from where I'd grown up, but worlds away in every other sense. I decorated it myself, filling it with awards and memorabilia from my shows, but also with things that had nothing to do with theater, art I loved, books I'd never had time to read in my previous life, plants that I kept meticulously alive as a daily reminder that I, too, was still growing. Sometimes late at night, I'd stand on my terrace and look out over the city, remembering the girl who'd looked out over these same lights while dying of poison. I'd think about parallel universes, about the infinite branching paths a life could take. In one universe, Sophia was the toast of Broadway while I was dead. In another, perhaps we'd been true cousins, supporting each other to mutual success. But in this universe, the one I'd chosen and fought for, I was alone at the top, and she was nobody at all. The theater community, always hungry for drama, had long since moved on from the story of the two cousins whose careers had gone in such different directions. New scandals, new failures, new triumphs had replaced us in the gossip mills. But occasionally, someone would bring it up, usually as a cautionary tale about hubris, or as inspiration about perseverance. "You and your cousin," an interviewer once asked, "such different paths from the same family. Do you ever think about what made the difference?" "Choices," I answered simply. "We all make choices, and we live with the consequences." "Do you keep in touch with her?" "No," I said, and didn't elaborate. What was there to say? That she'd murdered me in another life? That I'd destroyed her in this one? That we were locked in a cosmic dance of revenge that transcended death itself? The truth was, I did keep tabs on Sophia, though she never knew it. I watched from afar as she struggled and failed and eventually gave up. I saw the wedding announcement in a local Los Angeles paper. She'd looked happy in the photo, or at least content. Normal. Perhaps that was its own kind of success, finding peace in obscurity after such spectacular failure. 10 years after that opening night of Swan, I was back on Broadway, originating a role in a new musical about second chances. The irony wasn't lost on me. During rehearsals, a young actress approached me, nervous and eager. "Miss Chen," she said, "I'm such a huge fan. You're the reason I got into theater. I watched a bootleg of your performance in Swan when I was 13, and it changed my life." I looked at her, young, talented, hungry, and wondered if someone stood behind her with poison in their hand, if someone she trusted was planning her destruction. "Thank you," I said. "Work hard, trust yourself, and be careful who you let close." She nodded eagerly, taking it as typical mentor advice, not the hard-won wisdom of someone who died for trusting the wrong person. The show was another hit. Another Tony nomination, though I didn't win this time. The award went to a brilliant newcomer, and I applauded genuinely. I'd learned that success wasn't about winning everything. It was about surviving long enough to have the chance to compete. At the after-party, my parents approached me. They were older now, my father's hair completely gray, my mother's face showing lines despite her best efforts. Their marriage had survived the years, though I'd learned it had been rocky. The stress of having one daughter who exceeded expectations and a niece who'd failed so spectacularly had taken its toll. "We're proud of you," my mother said, the words still strange in her mouth even after all these years. "You've built something remarkable." "Despite everything," my father added, and I knew he was thinking of Sophia, of the family scandal she'd become, of the way her failure had initially reflected on all of us. Because of everything, I corrected. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us become the making of us. They didn't understand what I meant, couldn't know I was talking about dying and being reborn, about the gift of seeing how things could go wrong in time to make them go right. But they nodded as if they did, and we toasted to family, to success, to survival. Later that night, alone in my apartment, I pulled out a box I kept hidden in my closet. Inside were programs from both productions, Swan and Butterflies, from that fateful season. Sophia's headshot smiled up at me from the Butterflies program, young and confident and doomed. I traced her face with one finger, remembering the cousin she'd been before ambition poisoned her. The girl who'd played with me in our grandmother's garden, who'd shared secrets and dreams before those dreams became weapons. I'd won, completely, utterly, definitively won. I had everything she'd wanted and more. But victory, I'd learned, was a cold companion. It didn't erase the years of pain, didn't bring back the innocence we'd both lost, didn't change the fundamental truth that the person who should have loved me most had hated me enough to kill me. My phone buzzed with a text. David, now a director himself, inviting me to dinner to discuss his next project. Life, the real one I'd fought for, was calling. I put the programs back in the box back in the closet, and the past back where it belonged, behind me. But that night, I dreamed of parallel universes again. In one, Sophia and I stood together on stage, sharing a curtain call, both of us stars, both of us alive. In another, we were children again, before the poison, before the jealousy, before the choices that led us down diverging paths. In yet another, I was dying in that hospital bed while she gave her acceptance speech. But this time, she dedicated it to me, tears streaming down her face as she spoke of the cousin she'd loved and lost. I woke to sunlight streaming through my windows, the city already alive below me. Another day, another chance to live the life I'd reclaimed. I made coffee, reviewed my scripts, prepared for another day of being exactly who I'd fought to become. But first, I did something I'd never done before. I pulled out my phone and typed a message to a number I'd memorized but never used. Sophia's. It was simple. Just 5 words. I hope you're happy now. I deleted it before sending. Some things were better left unsaid, some bridges better left burned. But the impulse had been there. Some remnant of the girl who'd loved her cousin despite everything, who'd wanted nothing more than for them to succeed together. That girl was dead, had been dead even before the poison killed her. She'd died the moment she'd realized that family could be the deadliest enemy of all. But sometimes, in quiet moments like this, I could feel her ghost, whispering about what might have been in another life, another timeline, another universe where love was stronger than ambition and blood meant more than success. I raised my coffee mug in a toast to that ghost, to that other timeline, to the Sophia who might have been my sister in all but blood. Then I set it down and got on with the business of living, the exhausting, exhilarating, endless business of being alive when I should have been dead, successful when I should have been destroyed, victorious in a war I'd never wanted to fight. The show, after all, must go on. And I had finally, definitively, ensured that it would go on with me in the spotlight, where I'd always belonged, where Sophia had tried to ensure I'd never stand. Every performance was a triumph, not just of talent, but of survival, of choosing to live when someone had chosen my death. The final irony came years later when I was approached about writing my autobiography. The publisher wanted the whole story. The family drama, the rise and fall of 2 cousins, the brutal nature of show business. I considered it, even wrote a few chapters. But in the end, I declined. The true story was too unbelievable. Who would believe I'd been reborn with knowledge of my own murder? And the edited version, the one that could be told, felt like another kind of lie. And instead, I wrote a play. A fiction that told the truth about 2 sisters, easier for audiences to understand than cousins. About ambition and betrayal. About the prices we pay for our dreams. I called it Blood and Spotlights. When it premiered, with me directing but not performing, it was hailed as a searing examination of family and fame. No one except me knew it was also a confession, an epitaph, and an exorcism all at once. No one except me and perhaps Sophia, if she ever saw it. I'd made sure tickets were available at the theater in Los Angeles where it toured, just in case she wanted to see how our story ended when transformed into art. She never came, or if she did, she never made herself known. But the play ran for years, won prizes, became part of the theatrical canon. Our story, twisted into fiction, became immortal in a way we never could be as ourselves. Every night, actors played out our tragedy, our betrayal, our destruction of each other, and audiences applauded, never knowing they were watching the truth dressed in fiction's clothes. That perhaps was the ultimate revenge and the ultimate forgiveness, all at once. I'd turned our pain into art, our mutual destruction into something that would outlast us both. Sophia had killed me to become immortal on stage. In the end, I'd made us both immortal, but as a cautionary tale rather than a triumph. The last time I performed on stage was for a special benefit performance of Blood and Spotlights, playing the role of the mother, a small part, but pivotal, the woman whose favoritism set the whole tragedy in motion. It was 20 years after my rebirth, and I was finally old enough to play the generation that had failed us. As I delivered my final line, "I loved you both equally, just in different ways," I saw a figure in the wings. For a moment, my heart stopped, thinking it was Sophia. But it was just a stagehand, someone who happened to have her silhouette, her way of standing. The applause was thunderous. The entire cast took their bows, and I stood there, the author revealed, the survivor telling the story of the one who didn't survive, even though, in this timeline, it was Sophia's career that had died, not my body. After the performance, at the reception, a young journalist asked me about the play's inspiration. "Every family has its secrets," I said, giving my practiced answer. "Every success story has a shadow story, the one about who didn't make it. I wanted to explore that shadow." "But in your play, both sisters are destroyed in the end," she pointed out. "One dies, one lives but is ruined. Is that how you see family conflicts? As mutually assured destruction?" I considered the question, thinking about all the ways I could answer it. "I think," I said finally, "that when family members see each other as competition rather than support, everyone loses something essential, even the winner." "And what did you lose?" she asked, perceptive in that way young journalists could be. I smiled, the practiced smile of decades of interviews. "The illusion that love and blood are the same thing." She wrote it down, satisfied with the quotable answer. But the real answer, the one I'd never speak aloud, was simpler and more complex. I'd lost my first life, my innocence, my capacity to trust. But I'd gained something too. The knowledge that I could survive anything, even death itself, and come back stronger, smarter, more ruthless when necessary. The reception continued around me, celebrating the play, my career, the institution I'd become. I was Broadway royalty now, the kind of legend young actresses dreamed of becoming, the kind Sophia had killed me trying to be. That night, walking home through Times Square, I passed the theater where Swan had played all those years ago. They were doing a revival of Butterflies, if you could believe it, reimagined as a comedy, a parody of pretentious theater. The ultimate insult to what Sophia had tried to create. I stopped and looked at the poster, at the actress playing the role that had destroyed my cousin. She was young, pretty, probably talented. She had no idea she was standing in a graveyard. My phone rang, an unknown California number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me accept the call. "Hello?" There was silence for a moment, just breathing. Then, finally, a voice I hadn't heard in 2 decades. "I saw the play," Sophia said. "Blood and Spotlights, I saw it." I stood still in the middle of the sidewalk, tourists flowing around me like water around a stone. "And it's brilliant," she said, her voice older, rougher, tired. "Painful and brilliant and true." "Thank you." Another silence. Then, "Did you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd just helped each other? If we'd been actual family instead of competitors?" "Every day," I admitted, "but that's not who we were." "No," she agreed. That's not who we were. I poisoned you in the other timeline. Didn't I?" My heart stopped. "What?" "I dream about it sometimes," she continued, her voice distant. "Dreams that feel like memories. Watching you die in a hospital bed, winning a Tony for a role you should have played. They're so vivid, so specific. And then when I saw your play, the poisoning scene, it was exactly what I'd dreamed. I couldn't breathe. Was it possible? Had she somehow retained memories too? Or was this just guilt manifesting as dreams, her subconscious showing her what she'd been capable of? Sophia, I would have done it, she interrupted, if I'd thought of it, if I'd had the chance. That's what the dreams tell me. That's what I know about myself now. I would have killed you to have what you have. And you knew it, didn't you? That's why you let me destroy myself with butterflies. Because you knew what I was capable of. Yes, I said simply. There was no point in denying it now. I'm glad you won, she said. I'm glad you survived. I'm glad you got the life you deserved. And I'm glad I got the life I deserve too. Ordinary, small, safe from myself. Sophia, don't, she said. Don't forgive me. Don't make peace. We are what we are. We're what we were. But I wanted you to know, that I see it clearly now. The play helped me see it. Are you happy? I asked. The question I'd typed and deleted so many times. She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. I'm alive. I'm not in prison. I have a husband who loves me and doesn't know what I'm capable of. I have children I'm trying to raise to be better than I was. It's not the life I wanted, but it's the life I earned. Is that happiness? I don't know, but it's enough. Good, I said, and meant it. Goodbye, she said. Have the wonderful life you fought for. You earned it too. She hung up. I stood there in Times Square, surrounded by lights and life in the theater district that had been our battlefield, and I cried for the first time since my rebirth. Not tears of sadness or joy, but of something more complex. Completion, perhaps. The end of a story that had taken 2 lifetimes to tell. I walked home slowly, thinking about cycles and redemption, about second chances and the prices we pay for them. When I got to my apartment, I sat at my desk and began to write. Not another play, but a letter to Sophia, one I would never send but needed to write. Dear Sophia, I wrote, we were both the villain in each other's story. We were both the victim. We were both the author of our own destruction and salvation. In another universe, we loved each other. In another, we never existed at all. But in this one, we were exactly who we needed to be to become who we are. Thank you for killing me. It taught me how to live. Thank you for being my enemy. It taught me my own strength. Thank you for failing. It taught me that success without someone to share it with is just another kind of death. I hope your ordinary life is extraordinary in all the ways that matter. I hope your children never know hunger like ours. I hope you forget the dreams that might be memories. I hope you forget me except when you see my name in lights. And then I hope you feel nothing. Nothing at all, just peace. The peace I found in taking everything from you. The peace you found in losing it. We are even now, as even as 2 people can be, who have died and been reborn as each other's justice. Goodbye, cousin. Goodbye, enemy. Goodbye, the only person who ever really knew me, including the me I became to defeat you. I sealed the letter in an envelope, addressed it to her in California, and then burned it in my fireplace. The smoke rose up and out into the New York night, carrying the last of our story into the sky, where it dissipated like all stories eventually do, becoming part of the air everyone breathes, invisible and everywhere at once. The next morning, I woke to a new script, a new opportunity, a new day in my hard-won life. I read the script over coffee. It was good. A complex role about a woman who'd sacrificed everything for success only to wonder if it had been worth it. I laughed at the irony, then called my agent to accept the part. Because that's what you do when you've been given a second chance at life. You live it. You take every role, embrace every moment, never forget that each breath is a gift stolen back from death. You succeed not just to succeed, but because someone tried to stop you and failed. You become the star not just to shine, but to cast shadows. And sometimes late at night, you remember the girl who poisoned you, the cousin who loved and hated you in equal measure, and you raise a glass of water. Always water now, never anything you didn't pour yourself. to the war you both fought and the peace you finally found on opposite sides of the country, opposite sides of success, opposite sides of the grave you'd once shared. To Sophia, I would whisper to the darkness. To the life you took and the life I took back. To the villain who made me a hero. To the family that taught me that family means nothing and everything all at once. And then I would drink deeply, tasting nothing but clear, clean water, and get ready for tomorrow's performance. Because the show, as they say, must go on. And it would go on with me at center stage, exactly where I'd earned the right to be, one stolen life and one perfect revenge at a time.